It was August 18, 1590. 3 years had passed since Governor John White had left the small island of Roanoke, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. He had departed for England with a promise to return in 3 months, with desperately needed supplies. But war with Spain intervened, and 3 months turned into 3 long years of silence. Now, finally, White was back. As his ship anchored in the shallow, treacherous waters, his heart pounded. He had left behind 115 men, women, and children. Among them was his own daughter, Eleanor, and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dar, the first English child born in the New World. White expected to find a thriving colony, or perhaps a group of starving, grateful survivors. He imagined the smoke from chimneys, the sound of English voices, the cry of his granddaughter, now 3 years old. Instead, he found silence. As White and his men walked through the dense forest toward the settlement, the quiet was absolute. There was no smell of wood smoke. There were no barking dogs. They arrived at the clearing where the colony should have been. The houses were gone. They hadn't been burned or destroyed in battle. They had been carefully dismantled. A palisade wall had been built around the perimeter, like a fortress. But inside, there was no one. Not a single body, not a single bone. The only clue, the only message left behind by 115 vanished souls, was carved into a wooden post of the palisade, a single word etched without haste or panic. CROATOAN. This is the file on the oldest and most baffling mass disappearance in American history. The mystery that has haunted the United States for 4 centuries. This is the dossier of the Lost Colony. To understand the end, we must go back to the beginning. The 1587 colony wasn't England's first attempt at Roanoke. It was the second. And the island already had a history of blood. 2 years earlier, a military expedition led by Ralph Lane had tried to settle there. They were soldiers, not settlers. They treated the local native tribes, the CROATOAN and the CROATOAN, with brutality and suspicion. They kidnapped leaders, burned villagers over a stolen silver cup, and finally murdered the local chief. When Lane's soldiers abandoned the island in 1586, fleeing back to England, they left behind a legacy of hatred. Roanoke Island was not a virgin paradise. It was a diplomatic war zone, and it was into this powder keg that John White brought his expedition in 1587. Unlike the soldiers, this group was civilians, families. They wanted to build homes, not forts. They weren't even supposed to stay at Roanoke. The original plan was to sail further north to the Chesapeake Bay, a safer area. But the fleet's pilot, a man named Simon Fernandez, refused to take them further. Fernandez, a Portuguese privateer in English service, was eager to get back to plundering Spanish ships. He dumped the settlers on the cursed island of Roanoke in the height of summer and left. The situation deteriorated quickly. They arrived too late to plant crops. Supplies were dwindling, and the natives hadn't forgotten Ralph Lane's soldiers. Days after their arrival, a colonist named George Howe was found dead on the beach, riddled with arrows and his skull crushed. It was a message: you are not welcome here. Fear set in. The colonists begged Governor White to return to England to get reinforcements and supplies. White didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave his daughter and his newborn granddaughter in such a hostile place. But he had no choice. On August 27, 1587, John White said goodbye to Eleanor and little Virginia Dare. He promised to return before Easter. He watched the coast of Roanoke disappear over the horizon, not knowing he was looking at his family for the last time. White's journey was a nightmare. When he arrived in England, the nation was in total crisis. The Spanish Armada, the largest invasion fleet in history, was sailing to conquer England. Queen Elizabeth I ordered every seaworthy ship to stay in port to defend the homeland. No one cared about a tiny colony across the ocean. White was trapped. He tried to smuggle supplies on smaller ships, but they were captured by French pirates and looted. He moved heaven and earth, begging anyone who would listen. It took 3 years for the Armada to be defeated and for White to secure a passage on a privateer ship that agreed to stop at Roanoke. 3 years. Enough time for starvation, enough time for war, enough time for despair. When White finally stepped onto the island in 1590, the silence that greeted him was deafening, but the physical evidence was even stranger. The dismantled houses suggested the departure wasn't hurried. There was no surprise attack in the middle of the night. At time. They had buried their heavy chests and items they couldn't carry. White found some of his own belongings, which he had left behind, dug up and scattered across the grass, overgrown with weeds, as if they had been looted long after the colonists left. And there was the message. Before leaving, White had instructed the colonists. If they had to leave the island, they should carve the name of their destination on a tree or post. If they were leaving under distress or attack, they were to carve a cross above the name. White ran to the palisade post, CROATOAN. He searched frantically for the cross. There was no cross. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island, now Hatteras Island, and also the name of the native tribe that lived there. The CROATOAN tribe, led by Chief Manteo, had been friendly to the English in the past. Manteo had even traveled to London. Hope surged in White's chest. They weren't dead. They had simply moved to live with their friends, the CROATOANs, just 50 miles south. White ordered the ships to sail for CROATOAN immediately. But fate, or perhaps something darker, intervened again. A fierce storm, a hurricane, battered the coast. The ships were damaged, anchors were lost. The crew, superstitious and afraid of the treacherous waters they called the graveyard of the Atlantic, refused to continue. They forced White to return to England. He was so close. He knew where they had gone, but he had to leave them behind again. John White never returned to America. He died in Ireland a few years later, a broken man, haunted by the image of that carved word and the unknown fate of his granddaughter. So, what happened to the lost colony? For centuries, historians, archaeologists, and conspiracy theorists have tried to solve the puzzle. The most accepted theory, and the most hopeful, is assimilation. They went to CROATOAN. Abandoned by their own people, they integrated with the native tribe to survive. Reports from later explorers, decades later, mentioned seeing natives in North Carolina with gray eyes, blonde hair, and English. They spoke of ancestors who talked in books. It would be a poetic ending. The first English colony didn't die. It became American, merging with the land and its people. But there are darker theories. There is the Spanish theory. The Spanish in Florida knew about the English colony and saw it as a pirate threat. Is it possible a Spanish fleet sailed up the coast, found the settlers, and slaughtered or enslaved them, wiping out all traces to leave no martyrs? There is the native massacre theory. Perhaps the message CROATOAN was a trap or a misunderstanding. Chief Powhatan, father of Pocahontas, allegedly bragged to Captain John Smith years later that he had killed a group of people fitting the description of the Roanoke settlers. He even showed Smith some English iron utensils as proof. And of course, there are the supernatural theories. Local folklore speaks of spirits in the woods. The legend says Virginia Dare was transformed into a white doe, a ghost deer that still roams the Outer Banks, always escaping the hunters. Modern science has tried to find answers. Archaeologists have excavated Hatteras Island, formerly they found English signet rings, gun flints, and pieces of Elizabethan pottery mixed with native artifacts. It is physical proof they were there, but it doesn't prove their final fate. There is no mass grave. There is no written record. In 2012, a new clue emerged, worthy of a spy movie. The British Museum examined a map painted by John White with modern imaging technology. They discovered that under a patch of paper glued to the map, there was a hidden symbol, a symbol of a fort, located not on Roanoke, and not on CROATOAN, but 50 miles inland, at a location dubbed Site X. Did the colony split up? Did the main group go inland, to a secret location White knew about, but hid on the map to protect from the Spanish? Recent digs at Site X have found English pottery, but no smoking gun. The mystery persists, because the absence is total. 115 people. Their clothes, their tools, their Bibles, their body, everything vanished into the fog of history. The story of Roanoke is the primal fear of the New World. The idea that nature is too vast, too wild, and that civilization can be swallowed whole, leaving nothing but a name on a post. John White died, not knowing, and 400 years later, we don't know either. Maybe they starved, maybe they were killed, or maybe, just maybe, they survived. And the blood of the lost colony still runs in the veins of the people living in North Carolina today, a secret hidden in plain sight. Some stories were never meant for the light, but they are the stories that must be told. They are the files that must be opened. This has been a file from America's Dark Dossier. If you believe that the past is never truly dead, subscribe, and help us open the next file.